The year is 2022, a terrible year for U.S. immigration. The worst year yet worse is yet to come. The U.S. border is at a breaking point. 2.3 million desperate people trying to get through, 600,000 successfully evading the authorities and sneaking in, the so-called gotaways. Bloated bodies have been piling up in the river. No one has seen anything like this, not ever. But yes, it will get worse. This is the year a Peruvian man sets off on a vast journey that'll take him through the deserts of blistering hot sun, Rocky Mountain passes, and deceivingly unpredictable rivers. Like many before him, he won't reach his final destination, a place of safety in the USA. For many foreigners, the search for the American dream has become an American nightmare. Today, we'll try to understand why millions of people a year, in fact, are prepared to take what you'll see as a very, very high risk. A risk that's becoming an increasingly worrying predicament for the U.S. government and sections of the U.S. population. Never in the country's history have people seen anything like what's happening at present with the southern border immigration. When U.S. Border Patrol agents came across the Peruvian, he was a lifeless body floating in the Rio Grande, a 1,896-mile river that stretches through the southwestern United States and northern Mexico. Disturbingly, on that particular day, agents fished out almost a dozen other bodies they believed to have perished in the attempt to get to the United States. For some, their journey featured a weeks-long hike through jungles and mountains, sometimes passing through informal tollways manned by ruthless bandits. Still, for many of them, the last hurdle at the U.S. border proved to be the most difficult. 2022 was a bad year for immigrant deaths. The year the world's media talked about the most dangerous immigrant crossing in the entire world. The Peruvian was one of 853 migrants who died trying to cross the U.S.-Mexico border within 12 months, making it the deadliest year on record. U.S. Border Patrol reported that in 2021, there were 546 immigrant deaths. The number of deaths has often hovered around 300 to 400 per year, with a spike in 2005 at 492. From 2015 to 2020, it remained in the 200 to 300 bracket. Then, 2021 and 2022 broke records regarding fatalities and other measures we'll discuss today. Since 1998, over 8,000 undocumented migrants have died trying to cross the border. But as things look now, Border Patrol is going to be busier than ever in the near future scooping up the dead. The reasons people die are diverse. Sometimes not out of the ordinary, such as drowning, falling, or dying from thirst and exhaustion under what can be a very unforgiving sun in that part of the world. Imagine climbing cliffs or walking for hours through Breaking Bad-type desert in temperatures that reach 118 degrees Fahrenheit. As we'll show you later in the show, some of the deaths are far from what you'd call natural. Many of the players in the game of illegal immigration put no value on human life outside of what they're paid for transporting it. 65 Border Patrol stations are spaced from the west to the east of the U.S., from San Clemente in California's Orange County all the way to Brownsville in Texas. The U.S. shares about 1,954 miles of border with Mexico, which you can imagine takes a lot of protecting. With close to 60,000 full-time employees, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, is said to be one of the largest law enforcement organizations in the entire world. Right now, it's one of the most overstretched. While researching the show, we saw videos of agents shaking their heads at what's happening before their eyes. "We've been overrun," said one sheriff when Elon Musk was down at the border talking to him. A sheriff told the popular vlogger Peter Santinello in a video watched 6.7 million times that right now the situation is impossible for U.S. law enforcement, what he called a monstrosity at the border. Today we'll outline what he means by that, but first, let's talk about expenses. CBP's budget for 2022 was $14.643 billion, with another $1.018 billion added that the White House said was to address increased encounters at the southwest border. $6.159 billion was allocated for operations, hiring, and southwest border surge requirements, a 26% increase from the year before. $16.464 billion had been provided in funding for the CBP in 2023, as well as another $1.563 billion for various issues on the southwest border. The proposed budget for 2024 is $19.934 billion, and another $2.104 billion will be spent on additional border fencing. The 2024 budget proposal is $25 billion for both the CBP and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That's $800 million more than in 2023. These numbers show the urgency of the issue. On the very day we started making the show, the state of Texas approved $1.5 billion for building more barriers on the border with Mexico, with the state saying the federal budget wasn't enough to deal with what it said are millions of people crossing over illegally. Millions is a significant stretch, but there is record-breaking activity at the southern border. There was a record 2.4 million apprehensions, aka encounters of immigrants in the 2023 fiscal year ending in September. It's important to note that these aren't successful border crossings, though. Counting all borders, including Canada, Homeland Security has said the number is 3.2 million for 2023. The number for the South was 2.3 million in the 2022 fiscal year, well over the 1.7 million apprehensions for 2021. You'll see later just how insanely big these numbers are compared to the past. In 2023, 1.23 million people were handed notices to appear, or NTAs, before an immigration court. NTAs are when a person claims asylum. These people get the chance to be heard in a court of law, and the judge will decide what happens to them. There are some people claiming asylum and people trying to avoid contact with U.S. law enforcement. Some of the latter succeeded but are still on the radar. These people, in the language of the law enforcement, are known as the gotaways. You can't count the unknown gotaways because no one ever saw them. Some of these people might be hardworking individuals with commendable ethics, but they might also be hardened criminals. CBP said in 2023 it encountered 169 people on the FBI terror watch list, so it's possible that some bad people are getting through. We'll also discuss this matter later in the show. In October, the Department of Homeland Security said there had been something like 1,000 gotaways every day in the new fiscal year starting October 2023. This was nothing special. It was confirmed that in 2022, for the entire fiscal year, there were 599,000 gotaways. That was almost a record, but not quite. The year 2000 was a bad year too, when 614,000 people got away. We don't have a number for total gotaways in 2023, as the number hadn't been released before we prepared to make the video. But in May, the CBP reported that since the end of the fiscal year 2022, September 30th, there had been 530,000 gotaways. When the numbers released for 2023, there's little doubt it'll have smashed 599,000. Preliminary Border Patrol data said there were 769,174 gotaways for 2023. However, the former CBP chief Mark Morgan has said it could be over 1 million. That's more than the population of Austin, Texas in just 1 year. People are not the only things picked up by the CBP. In the fiscal year of 2022, the agency seized 25,901 pounds of fentanyl that was being sent across the southwest border, an amount that Homeland Security said was enough to kill around 6 billion people. CBP also arrested 32,097 aliens with criminal convictions. 598 were known gang members. 178 belonged to MS-13. If we look at what the CBP says is happening on any given day at the U.S. borders, 868,867 passengers and pedestrians legally passed through the borders per day in 2022, 547,318 of whom entered by land. Each day on average, CBP seized a whopping 2,895 pounds of recreational drugs. $217,700 of illicit currency was seized daily, as was $8 million worth of products with intellectual property rights violations. We told you, these guys are busy. When the CBP has an encounter with an illegal alien on the border, it classifies what kind of person it is. One classification is accompanied minors, AMs. In 2021, there were 687 encounters with accompanied minors, and in 2023, there were 2,535. Another classification is individuals in a family unit, FMUAs. In 2020, there were 70,994 FMUAs, but in 2023, there were 821,537 FMUAs. Then you have a very sad category of unaccompanied minors, UCs. In 2020, CBP encountered 33,239 UCs, and in 2023 the number was a startling 137,275 UCs. The last category is the big one, the single adults, SAs. There were 353,168 encounters with SAs in 2020. In 2023, that number was 1,514,322. So what changed? Secretary of State Antony J. Blinken this year accepted that the numbers are real. No one denies that the U.S. has a border problem spinning out of control. Blinken called the numbers totally aberrational, like nothing the U.S. has seen before. He said that in the past you might get a migrant crisis related to one country, such as Guatemala or maybe Honduras. But now, he says, people are heading to the U.S. in large numbers from many different nations. The migrant crisis today is multi-country rather than mostly single-country. In 2021, the Department of Homeland Security said the top 6 countries of origin for undocumented migrants were Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, India, Honduras, and China. During and after the pandemic, when the world's economies were shaken up, more people have been on the move. Over the last year, there's been a spat of Venezuelans illegally crossing into the U.S., which is not a surprise given that close to 8 million Venezuelans have left their country since its major economic recession began in 2014. With pervasive poverty, corruption, mega crime rates, and what's been called a health humanitarian crisis, it's easy to see why so many are opting for the long journey to the U.S. The Migration Policy Institute explained in 2023, some of it is political persecution, but most of it is just basic nutrition and healthcare and public services that have collapsed. In September 2023, Venezuelans were apprehended by CBP 54,833 times, compared to 22,090 arrests in August. That put Venezuelans above Mexicans. It's not something that's been seen before. You might be surprised that the CBP recorded 1,779 encounters with Russian nationals during the same month, down from 2,099 Russians in August. As for Chinese nationals, for September there were 399 encounters. We'll return to the U.S.'s present immigration woes in more detail, but now let's look at what life is like for an immigrant once they're on U.S. soil. If we look at statistics for immigrants already in the U.S., either legally with documentation or illegally living life on the high wire, Mexicans lead the way, with the Migration Policy Institute in 2022 saying there are now 10.6 million Mexicans living in the U.S. Next up are Indians, with 2.71 million Indian immigrants living in the U.S. Then comes the Chinese people at 2.38 million, Filipinos at 1.98 million, Salvadorians at 1.42 million, Vietnamese at 1.34 million, Cubans at 1.28 million, Dominicans at 1.26 million, Guatemalans at 1.11 million, and Koreans at 1.01 million. The latest data says about 11 million undocumented immigrants live in the U.S., meaning about 76% of immigrants are here legally. The country with the largest percentage of illegals in the U.S. by a long way is Mexico, with the latest numbers telling us around 50% or 5.3 million Mexican immigrants are not documented. The next highest was Salvadorians, but only 7%, 741,000, were considered undocumented. There are slightly fewer Guatemalans, 724,000 or 7% living in the U.S. illegally. The number of illegal Indians adds up to just over 55,000 or 5%, and illegal Hondurans add up to 490,000 or 4%. We should explain here that while a good chunk of illegal immigrants in the U.S. got in by crossing rivers and scaling walls, around 45% of unauthorized migrants entered the U.S. legally. They had a visa to be there, but they didn't want to go home when it was no longer valid, so they just stayed illegally. If they get caught, which they often do, they can be hit with deportation, and depending on how long they overstayed, can be banned for as little as 3 years or as much as 10 years. Some of these people are arrested by ICE and deported. In 2022, there were 78,433 such deportations. In 2021, it was 59,000, the lowest since 1996. But in 2020, there were 185,000. In 2017, there were 287,093 deportations, but that increased to 328,716 and 359,885 for 2018 and 2019, respectively. 2012 to 2014 were big deportation years, easily going over 400,000 for each of those years. Former President Obama, with 2.8 million deportations during his presidency, was sometimes called the deporter-in-chief. But President Bush, with 2 million before him, was also big on deportation. These two were easily the leaders in this category, although we should say that there was a change regarding what constitutes a deportation under Obama that might have affected the statistics. As for getting a job when you don't have papers, while the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986 makes it illegal for employers to hire undocumented workers or keep them employed knowingly, they still do it. These workers still have labor rights, but they also are sometimes exploited. The Texas Tribune recently wrote that an underground labor market pays low wages and occasionally embraces exploitation. The newspaper interviewed immigrants getting $90 for a grueling 14-hour workday, less than minimum wage. Some immigrants take advantage of what the Tribune called loopholes, backdoors, and private arrangements that allow them to work. Some have fake documents. Some just work as contractors, so they're invisible to the state. In 2005, the biggest employer in the U.S., Walmart, was fined $11 million for hiring hundreds of immigrants to work as cleaning contractors, meat processing and packing companies, jobs that might entail removing guts from animals or working like a robot on a conveyor line have been known to hire a lot of illegals. Countless studies show that immigrants are more likely to work in riskier jobs in the U.S. A paper on this topic published by the National Institutes of Health said 21 of 29 fatal construction accidents in New York City during a recent 12-month period involved workers who were immigrants or had limited English proficiency. It cited other research that said Hispanic workers are more vulnerable to injury or death at work than natives. This is hardly surprising, given many immigrants who have illegally stayed in the U.S. or have entered illegally through a border are likely to come from poverty in their home country. About 32% of adults in the U.S. who were born outside the U.S. don't even have a high school diploma, compared to 11% of natural-born Americans. According to studies, 35% of immigrants speak no English or just a bit of English. A big problem in the view of dangerous jobs is the lack of any health insurance. Undocumented immigrants in most states cannot, by law, enroll in federally funded coverage such as Medicaid, CHIP, or Medicare. Only 5 states offer insurance regardless of immigration status. Those are California, Illinois, Oregon, Colorado, and New York. But in some of those states, it was only for certain people, such as low-income individuals ages 65 and older. Health policy research says 50% of undocumented immigrants have no insurance whatsoever, compared to 18% of documented immigrants. Only 6% of naturalized citizens are without insurance, and 5% of native-born Americans don't have it. This can make being undocumented a tightrope existence, since many people won't visit a doctor or a hospital as they're afraid they'll be discovered and deported. This is particularly tough if you have a family or support a family back home, so people have been known to take big risks with their health. Things have certainly changed over the years. If you go back to 1960, about 75% of all immigrants in the U.S. were Europeans. They presently comprise just a small percentage of immigrants, maybe around 10%. Throughout the 1960s, around 19% of immigrants were from the Americas and 5% from Asia. Now it's closer to 52% from the Americas and 31% from Asia. In the year 1965, 9.6 million immigrants lived in the U.S., making up around 5% of the population. These days, there are around 45 million immigrants in the U.S., making up 14% of the entire population. It's also interesting that immigrants tend to have more children, according to Pew Research. This may have benefits since the U.S. is facing an aging crisis. There are around 54 million people now over the age of 65, but it's estimated to be 74 million by 2030. Experts on the matter have said that immigrants may well help reverse the aging crisis. The IMF wrote in 2020, "Immigration can solve the demographic dilemma, but not without the right policies." This is an expansive and controversial topic we'll save for another show. The U.S. is certainly a favorite spot for immigrants. Germany, the immigrant hotspot in Europe, has about 15.8 million immigrants. Saudi Arabia has 13.5 million immigrants, Russia 11.6 million, and the UK 9.4 million. We should add that different sources give us different numbers regarding the number of U.S. immigrants. The numbers 48 million and 50 million have also been posited. It could now be much higher given all the known and unknown gotaways. Whatever the case, it's a big number, but Australia, at 6.7 million immigrants, has a population that's made up of 28% immigrants, and Saudi Arabia's population comprises 34% immigrants. The United Arab Emirates is made up of 87% immigrants. With the latter, we see a country formerly described as a barren desert that has developed extremely fast. The truth is, there are always great big chunks of populations from poorer countries looking for a better life elsewhere. When Gallup conducted a huge poll in 2017, it was discovered that 750 million people worldwide, 15% of the world's population, wanted to live in another country, and the U.S., according to that poll, was the most desired location. 1 in 5 respondents ticked the box for the U.S. when asked where they wanted to go. It's quite amusing that 1 in 6 Americans, or 16%, said they wanted to get out of the U.S. Gallup said this was the highest measure to date for Americans wanting to leave the country where millions of people are dying, sometimes literally, to get in. Still, discontented Americans might be looking for adventure rather than a place where they can feed themselves or avoid persecution. After the US, the next top spots where people said they wanted to go were Canada, 6% of the 750 million, Germany, 6%, France at 5%, Australia, 5%, and the UK, 4%. Gallup added that most of those who wanted to move had no plans to move. We might now ask, why is the US so popular with outsiders, yet not so popular with many insiders? What's so good about the good old US of A? After all, head to YouTube and all manners of videos would make you think the US has turned into a dystopian nightmare with a population about as polarized as Christians and Muslims during the Bloody Crusades. Countless videos show neighborhoods in US cities, often places of deindustrialization, that look like the aftermath of a zombie apocalypse. So much news about the US is negative these days, especially if you're watching the latest mass shooting or obesity/drug/mental health crisis from abroad. Even so, the US is still a land of relative opportunity, where for some people it'll feel like milk and honey run like rivers next to streets paved with the greenbacks. Okay, maybe we employed a little poetic license there, but studies do show that many people head to the US for what they rightly think will be a better life, with more work opportunities and, in general, a much higher standard of living. They believe that anyone can make it in America, a country built by immigrants who believe everyone had a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Unlike some countries where people can have little chance of social mobility, many immigrants believe that with hard work, they can be successful in the US, and their success will ripple out through generations to come. This is evident when you look at how, say, Jewish or Chinese people arrived in the US dirt poor, and within a generation or two, their offspring were doctors. The American dream is still alive, but more so in the minds of people living outside the US borders. Many immigrants might live in poverty, but remember, poverty is relative. It can be more brutal or deadly in other nations. If any of you have known immigrants, legal or illegal, you'll know they often send money back home. The wages in the US compared to developing nations are very high. The dollar is also a strong currency. News reports just said in Mexico, the minimum wage has increased to $11.54 a day. US minimum wage is $7.25 per hour, and the average wage for asking, "Do you want fries with that?" across the US is $12.83 an hour, according to the job website Indeed. In Nicaragua, the minimum wage was $213 a month. In El Salvador, it's $243 a month. Activists say this doesn't cover basic needs. Anyone who knows Southeast Asia knows that laborers or even semi-skilled construction workers in this part of the world might earn $200 to $300 a month, while in the US you can do okay if you're prepared to do hard labor. That's not to say the US doesn't have issues or people don't struggle, but the US, for many immigrants, offers plenty of real opportunities if you're prepared to knuckle down. The book Streets of Gold, America's Untold Story of Immigrant Success, shows with numbers how the children of immigrants are very good at climbing the economic ladder. In 2017, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine wrote that the second generation are among the strongest fiscal and economic contributors in the US. This allows them to take care of their family back home. According to the United Nations, 1 in 9 families in the entire world is supported financially by a family member working as an immigrant in a foreign country. The UN says on average they send 15% of their wage to their family. Half of that money goes to families in rural areas, which are the poorest areas. Getting the green light to work in the US for some people can change the fortune of generations to come. The UN says immigrants sending cash to their poor families has a profound effect on lessening poverty and is 3 times more effective than international aid. In its own words, the UN said, in 2018, over 200 million migrant workers sent $689 billion back home to remittance-reliant countries, of which $529 billion went on to developing countries. Other more recent statistics say over 270 million migrants living and working abroad regularly send cash transfers to their home countries. 3 countries that receive a lot of these funds are Mexico, Vietnam, and the Philippines. The funds come from countries such as the US, the United Arab Emirates, and Germany. With that in mind, getting into the US might not just save one person, it might save a family from the brink of poverty extinction. For the family receiving funds, it could be the difference between university or joining a cartel, or working in a brothel. Some people fear increased levels of immigration due to the extra competition for jobs and resources. This happens in poor countries too, where poorer immigrants cross over their border. We are, after all, in a fight to survive from the day we were born. And speaking in basic terms, we want our patch of land and its resources for ourselves. Scientists talk about metathesiophobia, the fear of change. People naturally fear a loss of identity with increased immigration, maybe related to their religion, their language, their culture, their overall power, and the privileges they believe are associated with their identity. When immigrants are a few generations in, they might also fear newcomers. This is an issue as old as time. In some parts of England, Brexit had the support of families who were fresh off the plane immigrants not that long ago because they feared more competition over jobs and resources. One English-Pakistani family told The Guardian, "We have worked so hard to earn the right to live here and contribute to these communities. What we don't want is more people coming in who won't bring anything positive and will just take." Immigration can breed hostility, which throughout history has led to extreme violence. Sometimes it results in people saying that immigrants cause crime spikes. This is very controversial, so let's look into it in the US and elsewhere. Plenty of studies have been conducted on this divisive topic. They give mixed results, which is hardly surprising because immigration takes on many forms in many different countries. One meta-analysis of scores of conflicting studies on crime and immigration from 1994 to 2014 said, findings indicate that overall, the Immigration Crime Association is negative, but very weak. At the same time, there is significant variation in findings across studies. In the US, some studies have said increased immigration leads to reductions in crimes. In 2018, the illegal immigrant criminal conviction rate in Texas was 782 per 100,000 and 535 per 100,000 for legal immigrants. The criminal conviction rate for native-born Americans in Texas that year was 1,422 per 100,000. Texas, it seems, is the only state that recorded the immigration statuses of those arrested, so it's hard to know what happens all over the US. It is known that immigrants often fear the law due to the chance of deportation, which could be a reason for the low crime rates. Keep your head down is what many immigrants say about life in the new country. Some obviously don't. Many immigrants only want to work hard and reap the rewards. But there are bad apples. It's thought the gang MS-13 has 8,000 to 10,000 members in the US and about 50,000 globally, and many of these hardcore street gangsters are immigrants. As you've seen, some head to the US today. Just recently, the Swedish Prime Minister said Sweden had made a mistake with its immigration policy after the country experienced never-before-seen gangland shootings, with the gangs being mostly immigrants. In September 2023 alone, 11 people were murdered in gangland killings. Unprecedented in Sweden. The PM said in a televised address, Sweden has never seen anything like this before. No other country in Europe sees anything like it. He talked about an irresponsible immigration policy and failed integration. Even so, others in Sweden had said just a few years earlier that the relation between crime and immigration was highly exaggerated. It seems now, as things stand in Sweden, they were wrong, but that doesn't mean such outbreaks of violence will happen elsewhere. A study of US immigration revealed, we find that there is no discernible effect on country-level property or violent crime rates. In 2018, Reuters published an article on immigration to Germany that said, violent crime rises in Germany and is attributed to refugees. As we said, the effect of immigration regarding crime is complicated. Culture matters, especially if the imported culture contains high levels of violence, perhaps against women. A study on Norwegian immigration revealed that while just 13% of Norway's population were immigrants when the study was conducted, this 13% represented 47% of the people convicted of murdering their partners. The perpetrators mostly came from Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, and Eritrea, where women's rights are not the same as in Norway. There will always be a few bad apples on the tree of life, which brings us to our next topic: the criminal elements that exploit people's desperation by charging them large sums to break into the US illegally. In 2022, the US news media reported a horror called the deadliest human smuggling event in US history. This was 53 deaths of immigrants. These people had hoped to get into the US and start a new life, but they were left in the back of a sweltering tractor trailer without food or even water on a hot day in Texas. They cooked in that trailer: Mexicans, Guatemalans, and Hondurans. One of them was a 14-year-old kid from Guatemala who told his family he was going to work his butt off in the US and send money home so they could build a new house. This kid's family lived in the town of Nahuala, where according to the Guatemalan president's office, 84% of the population lives in poverty and 13% lives in extreme poverty. Adults working on farms might earn $3 to $5 daily to feed an entire family. It's no surprise that a teenager had dreams of earning a proper crust in the US and sharing it with his kin. After the tragedy, it was discovered that the kid was following in the footsteps of his older brother, who had told him there was work in the US. His brother had become a gotaway in the US and subsequently got a job. He paid smugglers to get him into the US 1 year before his brother died. The cost of being smuggled into the US can often be as high as $12,000, a huge amount for people bringing in $5 a day. They don't always pay up front though, as the brother didn't. Once working in the US, he started paying off his debt to the smuggling outfit. You'll see in a minute what happens when you don't pay your debt. Two other victims in the trailer, brothers, were just 17 and 19, with the hopes that they'd make it in the US. Their parents had taken out a loan against their house to pay the smugglers $10,000 for each son. It sounds like a lot, and it is, but if you're coming from Africa, Eastern Europe, or Asia, you might be looking at more like $20,000, maybe as much as $50,000. According to one source that mentioned Chinese immigrants, the cheapest price we saw in news media was $2,000 for the US border jump and a ride away. That's still a lot when you consider that a very legal Greyhound ticket from Tijuana to San Diego can cost as little as $12.99. Prices differ for smuggling operations just as they do when you take economy or business class on a plane. Smugglers in Mexico often give their clients color-coded wristbands that designate which service they'll receive and where they're being sent. Despite the violence they sometimes inflict, the cartels often run their operations like a professional business. The UN says you can buy a package deal, an expensive all-in-one that could take you all the way from somewhere like Honduras to Texas. But there's also a pay-as-you-go, which means paying in increments throughout various parts of the journey. The UN says these migrants are more likely to become stranded and be exposed to abuse. The comprehensive package deal is usually faster, more comfortable, and has a much higher success rate. No one would buy them if they continually failed or were overly dangerous. Thousands of immigrants get through this way, paying criminals in Mexico, who in turn often bribe low-paid Mexican police. On the US side, there are also criminals in the smuggling business. The cartels work both sides of the border. As one smuggler said, they often create a diversion so US Border Patrol agents flock to a certain spot. There's nothing fancy, he says, that happens next. Once the agents are out of the way, the people are smuggled by climbing over ropes or ladders provided through holes in the fence. The smuggler explained, if the agent or the camera didn't see them, the migrant can walk away as if nothing happened. They can walk right by a Border Patrol agent, and if they keep their cool, they're gone. The job of a US Border Patrol agent can sometimes be compared to Sisyphus in Greek mythology, pushing that giant ball of rock up a hill for all eternity. And people just keep coming, day after day, and there aren't enough agents to stop it. There's also no shortage of people wanting to help with the smuggling process. The smuggler we just mentioned was not a crime boss. He was just a kid who was poor as hell and has taken advantage of a thriving market. There will also be plenty of people exploiting the market. It's well known to the people working in the smuggling racket that if they take people through the Mexican desert, there are often gangs out there waiting, armed, who kidnap, rob, or beat people. Some of these gangs charge a toll to pass them, costing in the region of $300 a person. There were 492 reported attacks and kidnappings of such people in a matter of months in 2021, according to a human rights organization. The smuggler said he charges $5,000 to $6,500 per person to get them all the way to LA. This is a lot, but he said he faces a long prison time if he gets caught. He takes home about $2,500 per person due to his paying $200 for every migrant to Mexican cops and a massive $2,800 to $3,000 to the person doing the risky driving to LA. He might also pay decoys, lookouts, and folks who have safe houses about $200, so his earnings quickly diminish. Still, he says he gets his new clients every couple of days. With the massive uptick in the getting into the US business, the New York Times now says smuggling is a billion-dollar market just on the southern border. As we said, the money is sometimes paid back as debt. The smugglers on the US side are serious about collecting too. The FBI raided a safe house recently and found a migrant in a state of distress. His captors, whom he had not paid, had smashed his hands with a hammer. The US authorities reported that hundreds of migrants had been held in this house of horrors. Some men had been mutilated, while some women had been the victims of serious sexual misconduct. The New York Times described the scene that awaited the cops. Another migrant, stripped down to his underwear, was squirming in pain, his bludgeoned hand held aloft in the front bedroom. In the rear bedroom, agents encountered a nude woman, another migrant who had just been assaulted by a smuggler who emerged naked from the bathroom. This was the work of the Los Zetas cartel, an organization that might seem inviting to Mexicans living in poverty. As a former Mexican drug cop and organized crime investigator, Ed Calderon had said in a shocking podcast interview, the cartels pick up new recruits all the time. They actively seek them out, just normal guys who don't have work. The money is much better and sometimes less risky than becoming a cop. So poverty creates smugglers as much as it creates the smuggled. This is why US Border Patrol has a Sisyphean job on their hands, something they can usually do well but not right now when they're so overwhelmed. You put one smuggler in prison and another pops up right away. U.S. authorities arrested and charged 5,046 people with human smuggling in 2022, up from 2,762 in 2014. Authorities raided stash houses and found migrants in them on pretty much a daily basis last year. Sometimes there were high-speed chases and shootouts. It never stops. The wave of immigration is like a perpetually recurring tsunami of human desperation. This wave is no more evident than at the U.S.'s illegal immigration hotspots. This year, that's the El Paso sector in Texas. Nowhere along the border is the CBP busier this year. Before we get into this, you need more information on what's going wrong this year. Remember, we told you there were 2.4 million encounters in 2023 and 2.3 million in 2022. These were record-breaking numbers. In 2021, you'll remember we told you the number was 1.7 million. The last peak before the current peak was in 2000, when encounters hit 1.6 million. They hit that number in the late 80s too, having climbed steadily from the 1960s onwards, then after 2000 climbing back down again. In 2017, the numbers hit a 17-year low at about 304,000 encounters, but the numbers had been under 500,000 since 2010. Encounters numbered 859,501 in 2019, then came down to 405,000 in 2020, and as you know, they went through the roof after that. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the CBP began arresting people under something called Title 42, which was invoked to expel immigrants easily. During the pandemic, the U.S. took a hardline stance to stop the spread of the virus. In 2020, around 90% of apprehended immigrants were immediately deported, compared to about 50% in 2021 and just 32% in 2022. Under Title 42, immigrants cannot claim asylum. It gave the government the power to deport people immediately since the law, based on a public health law made in 1944, states anyone who may be contagious and pose a serious danger to U.S. citizens can be kicked back without any legal barriers. They can also try again without any criminal consequences. It seems many have. But under Title 8, the usual law for immigration, if they're processed and deported, they are banned from trying to enter again for 5 to 10 years. And if they do attempt a crossing, they could end up in jail or face other charges. A lot of the present crisis is because many immigrants were waiting for Title 42 to end. Many from the Northern Triangle countries of Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. These people had been poised for the law to change. They thought it would help them get in easier. This has caused a problem since so many different nationalities are now involved. With numbers so high, the Biden administration recently enacted something called expedited removal. This makes it easier to deport people without a court hearing, but only if they aren't claiming asylum. If they do try and claim asylum, they'll undergo a screening process called a credible fear interview. Not all of them will get to have the interview, just because the U.S. doesn't have enough resources, officers, and detention facilities, as well as flights out of the country. Yes, flights. South and Central America, Africa, and China are far away. It's hard to send someone back on foot if they come from Nigeria or Xinjiang, or must risk desert and jungle again getting back to South America. In some countries, the U.S. might not have a return migration agreement. That was the case for Venezuela for 7 years, so the U.S. couldn't just put Venezuelans on a plane and send them back. Still, in 2023, the U.S. started doing just that again. This year, the White House also said it would give temporary protected status to the 472,000 Venezuelans who arrived in the U.S. as of July 31st. Some in the U.S. have criticized sending people back to places with plenty of documented human rights violations. Still, flying someone back to Venezuela is better than making them make their own way back. They won't have to cross a desert and a particularly dangerous stretch of the Panamanian jungle, the Darien Gap, often called the most dangerous migratory crossing in the world. The UN said the number of people crossing this 5,000 square kilometers of tropical wilderness, steep mountains, and rivers tripled from 2021 to 2023, where people face natural dangers and bandits waiting to pounce on them over their 10-day, 14-hour-a-day hike. This area was once called impenetrable, but in 2023, hundreds of thousands of people crossed it, including pregnant women and men carrying babies on their backs. They would often pay guides to get them through Colombia, into Panama, and on to Costa Rica, and further north. When one Venezuelan woman making the journey was asked why she'd risk her life like that, she replied, "We earned $40 between us, and a kilo of meat costs $15. What can you do?" After a huge surge of immigrants in the fall of 2023, it was reported that nearly 40% of the 60,000 asylum seekers in New York City were from Venezuela. New York City is one of the places to go for immigrants since it has something called the right to shelter rules. The Migration Policy Institute wrote that these many thousands of immigrants move organically, quietly, and gradually across the U.S. to find the best place suited to their needs. Still, the screenings have now been made harder with a higher threshold, which the media says is to make it so non-Mexican asylum seekers can more easily be rejected, deported, and banished for 5 years. The people who are accepted as an asylum case might have to prove they are fleeing persecution in their home nation, possibly as a result of their nationality, race, political stance, or religion. There can also be exceptional circumstances, such as the threat of murder or kidnapping. Poverty and hardship don't cut it. Legal experts have said most people trying to claim asylum don't actually meet the criteria. In some cases, such as with Venezuelans, the U.S. has created a scheme in which immigrants will be granted stay in the country if they have a U.S. sponsor. We don't mean Nike, we mean a person or a family guaranteeing they'll be taken care of. Even so, desperate people have arrived in droves at the U.S. border, believing the U.S. has become a little more friendly to people like them. As you know, that's millions of people, many of whom are now stuck, waiting, and praying. Immigrants seeking asylum can make an appointment with the U.S. authorities using the CBP One app. Still, according to The Guardian, the app is riddled with technical glitches, indecipherable error messages, and mistranslations of English words. Some asylum seekers also don't have the right kind of phone or the Wi-Fi or cellular data plan to get online. One of the immigrants who tried and failed to use the app said in an interview, "We crossed into the U.S. through a hole in the wall. We were looking for Border Patrol, but we didn't see any that day. We just walked right in. Our plan was always to come through legally. We tried going through the CBP One app, but it never worked." There's currently a huge backlog of asylum cases, over 2 million immigrants waiting, most of them in the U.S. poised to have their day in court. Some others are faced with more difficult existence of being held in a long-term detention center. Of course, the free people could just disappear once they get in, but they'll be living their lives with a threat of deportation after that. Some live with an ankle bracelet so immigration can find them, but certainly not all. The sheriff we mentioned at the start, who spoke with Peter Santinello, said the people disappear all the time and never report to immigration. The sheriff worked in the Yuma sector in Arizona, which saw the third highest number of encounters in 2022 at just over 310,000. In 2023, that number was down 43% to 174,200. With claiming asylum posing all kinds of hurdles and with so many people knowing full well they won't get in that way, they opt for the other solution, sneaking in. And as we said, the hottest spot right now is the El Paso sector, which has overtaken the Rio Grande Valley sector. For you non-Americans, that's Texas. Reports show that a large group of people trying to enter this sector as of late were wearing blue bracelets. These people had paid the Mexican Gulf Cartel. Its logo, a dolphin, was also on the bracelets next to the word entregas, meaning deliveries. Once they got over the river, the Gulf Cartel washed their hands of them. Reports say that in some cases it's impossible to cross certain stretches of the river without paying a toll to the Cartel del Noreste, a group that originates in the Los Zetas syndicate. In September 2023, the border town of Eagle Pass, Texas, announced a state of emergency. This town is in the Del Rio sector, the number 2 busiest spot this year. Amazingly, 6,000 migrants crossed the Rio Grande River in just 2 days and walked into the town home to just 28,000 people. Talk about a crazy 2 days, a dangerous few days too. The river here is a scary thing indeed. In September 2022, it was reported that 9 immigrants died in 1 day from drowning near Eagle Pass. The river might look mild, but there are dangerous currents and whirlpools. Eagle Pass's fire chief explained, "Almost every single day we respond to the river and recover at least 1 body a day." One of the more recent reports stated that the body of a 3-year-old was found floating there. There are 9 main sectors on the southern border. The numbers regarding the busiest sectors change depending on where the smugglers want people to cross and what the whack-a-mole U.S. authorities are doing. Certain nationalities are also prone to heading to a certain sector, which would make sense as traffickers will do their business in certain sectors. If people have made their own way to the border, they'll likely follow a crowd they're more familiar with in terms of culture and language. In 2022, there was an increase in Indian nationals in the San Diego, El Centro, and Yuma sectors. Many Cubans headed to the Del Rio sector, and many Colombians that year went to the Yuma sector. Border Patrol said it found large numbers of people from Turkey and Haiti in the El Paso sector in 2022. Nicaraguan and Brazilian migrants made up a large number of arrests in all sectors. A significant number of Romanians were encountered in the San Diego sector. The CBP statistics, which we'll say are really thorough, good work someone, put many people at all borders in the other category, especially San Diego, El Centro, and Yuma. These people must come from a collection of nations. As we said, the El Paso sector has been the busiest this fiscal year, with an overall 39% increase in migrant encounters from the last year. Those encounters numbered 427,471. The Del Rio sector saw 393,226 encounters, followed by the Rio Grande Valley, which had 338,337. In Southern California, there was an increase of 31% in the San Diego sector, 230,900, and a 30% decrease in the El Centro sector, 50,500. The numbers will always fluctuate as the U.S. plays whack-a-mole and the gangs keep changing their tactics. The dark irony is that where there's a higher risk of death, many immigrants go, as there's usually less U.S. law enforcement. It's the same the entire journey from South America. The more off-road you go, the less chance you have of being arrested, but the more chance you have of falling off a cliff or being robbed by a bandit. Fortune favors the brave, an expression never any more evident than in the life of an immigrant who, as we write this show, has just narrowly lost a fight against arguably the world's best heavyweight boxer. Francis Ngannou, once a street-fighting boy from Cameroon who as a teen labored in a sand quarry, paid smugglers for his harrowing journey across the Sahara and through Europe toward France, where he intended to become a fighting champion. He did it, but his tale of being smuggled is pockmarked with tragedies he witnessed. The smuggling routes from East, North, and West Africa to Europe are another money spinner for criminals who, with smugglers who take people from South America to North America combined, generate around $6.75 billion. Ngannou, who now has French citizenship and legally works in the USA, has become fluent in English. He's a multi-millionaire thanks to fighting. He sends money home and he built a gym there for poor kids to use, following what other successful immigrants have done for centuries. He earned $12 million for going toe-to-toe with the Gypsy King Tyson Fury, whose gypsy descendants also know what it's like to be treated like you don't belong. We told you this to show that some immigration stories do have happy endings, but for the US right now, this influx is out of control and the government needs to get it back under control. The problem for politicians is finding a humane solution, something not always easy where very complex problems are concerned. Now you need to watch why so many Americans are fleeing these areas, or have a look at real reason why 50% of murders happen here.